Hey all, Nick here. In our last video, we went from an idea, we just jotted down some notes, and then we put a really rough Figma comp together, both from a UI perspective, a super simple UI perspective, and a high-level architecture diagram of an application. The goal of this application is quite simple. We want to be able to enter a contract address, get back a list of events that that contract emits, and then allow the user to post to any given URL when that event fires. So almost like an if this then type of system where we can listen for contract addresses, contract events, and then post to any HTTP endpoint that we choose, along with the topics that that event emits. So there are a bunch of different components to this application, and this is really kind of a new thing we're trying here. We're trying to do this kind of open build session where we can we're just kind of recording the sessions and building it in the open, and we're seeing how it goes. So here we have our architecture diagram where we have the front end. If I can zoom into this a little bit, we have our front end. We're going to have a database layer. We're going to have some type of ABI API. This is where we can return the ABI, the application binary interface, from, say, the Etherscan API to be able to get a kind of a list of the events that a contract fires. And then we're going to have some backend stuff. Today, I really want to focus on the initial front-end development and going out and grabbing that ABI from the Etherscans API. All right, so what are we going to do? So first things first, let's go ahead and let's create a new project. I'm going to use Next.js for this. Next.js is going to give us basically a nice full stack that we can develop with. We can do some backend stuff. We can do some front-end stuff. Kind of gives us a nice kind of package for us to work with. So I'm going to use the create next app, and let's go ahead and use let's call it the Web3 event router. Okay. This is going to go out there and get everything together for us. Now, from a front-end styling perspective, why don't we use Tailwind? This way we don't have to be futzing around with any CSS. So Tailwind is just a super simple framework for us to be able to style our application by just using classes on our components elements. So let's go ahead, and they have some really good documentation here. So if we just go here and say Next.js, this is going to give us a really good overview on how to actually get this configured. So we'll go ahead and install its dependencies here. We do need to go ahead and get into this directory. So now we have our Next.js application. I'm going to go ahead and bring in these dependencies for Tailwind. Tailwind is going to want to be initialized here. So let's go ahead and do that. And as I'm doing this, if anybody following along, please, if there's anything I can improve in the comments, I'm doing this really kind of putting myself out there to learn and grow. So if I'm doing anything that's incorrect or anything that can be improved, please let me know. All right, so now we have our Tailwind configuration and our post CSS configuration. We do need to add some things to our Tailwind config here, which is going to basically tell Tailwind what files to watch for the content. Right, so let's go ahead, and I'm going to open this up in VS Code. Now I am using Copilot, which is GitHub's and OpenAI's product for doing a lot of really interesting code completion within VS Code. Hopefully this is going to help us fasten this up a bit. So I'm going to go into Tailwind config here, and we're just going to go ahead and replace this content with that. And I think there's one other thing we need to do here. Yes, we need to bring in the Tailwind components into our global CSS. So let's go ahead and do that. And let's go into our styles and global CSS. And let's go ahead and import our Tailwind components. Excellent. Cool. Now we can go ahead and run our application as normal, and we have a nice little CSS framework we can work with. Excellent. So now let's go ahead and say run dev. This will run the development server for us. And there we go. We have a Next.js application running. And now we can go in and start start to change this a bit. So let's go ahead and we're going to go into our pages and our index page, and we're going to get rid of this whole thing. We don't need any of that because we're going to go ahead and overwrite that. Now, as we build this, we're probably going to break this up into smaller components, but I'm going to keep this as simple as possible to start. So we're going to go ahead and create our own index page, and we'll go ahead and let's just simply return something that a simple hello world, just to make sure that we're doing our thing and everything is looking good. So we'll go ahead and export that. Excellent. So now if we go to our application, we should have a simple hello world. There we go. Excellent. Now, obviously we want a little bit more than that. We'll go ahead and we'll try to develop this first page here where we just enter the contract address and some next button. So let's go ahead and do that. So we'll keep the div in there. We're going to say div class name, and we're going to make this flexbox, and I think that's probably what we need, right? Flex col, item center, justify center. That's probably all we need there. Let's go ahead and close this div, and we're going to input create an input, and what's the input going to be? We'll say class name. Now this is going to try to put a bunch of stuff on this, which, you know what, let's see what it looks like. And instead of search, we're going to put contract address. Now, let me go ahead and also zoom into this a little bit because I'm not sure how well this is coming over in the video. So now we should have, there we go, a big class, a big input with the contract address in there. And let's go ahead now and put a button in here. And look at this. So this is like, this is insane. It's auto completing a bunch of this for us. It's probably going to look okay. And let's just put next in here, and we'll put the button there. There we go. So we have a next button there. Excellent. Now, I don't like the width of the input here, so why don't we go ahead and change the width. This is currently width full. Why don't we go ahead and change this to width 1/3. There we go. So now we have a contract address and a next button. You know, it's a start on styling. It's kind of matching the very simple comp that we've got going on here to some degree, but it's enough for us to get started. So let's keep it moving. Awesome. So now we have this component here. Now, it obviously doesn't do anything yet, right? So the first thing we need to do is we need to capture the input, which is the contract address. And we need to do that in a way that allows us to grab this data and eventually send it off to a web service that's going to go ahead and grab the ABI if it exists. So the way we could do that with React is we can use state. So I'm going to go ahead and create a state variable here. We're going to say const contract address, and then we'll have the set on there, and we'll say use state, and we'll make that state just empty by default. And I'm just going to type this here just to get the import. That'll bring the import in for us. And now we have the state there. Now what we can do is on the input itself, we can put a little on change on this. So we can basically have the state changed automatically when we change it. So on change, and this is going to be a function, right? And then the function is going to pass in the event. And then we could just call the set contract address with the target value of the event. So e.target.value. And that should automatically now, every time we type in the field, set the contract address to this state variable. Excellent. So now what we could do is we can now use that information when we submit this, right? So now we want to just develop a function that's going to submit the contract address. So what we could do is we could say const submit, if I could type this, submit contract address. And we'll go ahead and make this a function. We will take an event here, and now all we're going to want to do here is let's prevent default, and then we don't want to set the contract address here. I just want to console.log the contract address. All right. and we just want to make sure that we are in fact getting the address. So now we don't actually call this yet, right? We need to call it here on the button. So when we say on click, and we'll go ahead and call this. So we'll say submit contract address. Okay. So let's see if this worked. So let's go back here. Just going to make sure it's refreshed. I'm going to open our console, and I'm going to go ahead and just put anything in here. Next. There we go. So all we should see is this kind of return, just an echo right onto the console of what we've entered. Now, obviously, we're going to want to do some type of validation to this, right? And making sure that the contract address is in fact valid. But for now, let's just go ahead and grab it, and we're gonna try to pass it to this web service. So how do we do that? Right now we have this basic comp configured and working to some degree, but now we need to go out and get the ABI. Now, luckily, Etherscan has an API that allows us to grab the ABI of any of the contracts that are on Etherscan and have been code verified. So this is super helpful to us, because without this, we would basically have to ask the user to input the ABI or just paste it in. Now, this may be something we want to add in the future, because not all contracts are code verified on Etherscan, and we may get into a situation where you want to watch a contract, say a custom contract you've written, that you do have the ABI for, but it's not published anywhere. So for now, we're just going to be dealing with contracts that do have code verified on Etherscan. So if we look at the API documentation here, you can see that we have this get contract ABI for verified contract source codes. Awesome. This is exactly what we need. And it's super simple. All we have to do is hit this URL with the address, the action, and our API token key. So the question now is, where do we do this? Do we do this in just like on the front end? Or could we do this on the back end? I would probably recommend we do this on the back end. This way that we can keep our API keys secure on the back end. We don't have to publish the API keys to the front end and have users use them. We could also get into other situations where we, are calling from all over the internet on the client side. So let's not do that. Let's keep it on the back end. And one of the interesting things about Next.js is the fact that we do have a really simple system for us to create API endpoints within our own application. So you can see here in the API directory, I have this hello.js that gets auto-generated from our from the scaffolding of creating the app. And what we could do here is we could basically just create an endpoint we can hit from the front end. Awesome. So let's see what this would look like. So let's go ahead. I'm going to rename this to get ABI, right? .js. And then what we'll do is we'll keep that this way. And actually we'll keep this all like this. But what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to go out to Etherscan and basically make a request. Now, how are we going to do that? So what we're going to do is we're going to basically make a fetch request, and we're going to pass in the contract address in the body of the request. So we'll post the contract address. So we'll say contract address, and we're not going to get it from the query. We'll get it from the body. And what we're going to want to do now is build that endpoint. So we'll say const endpoint equals, and let's go here and let's grab this. And we'll make this a string literal. So we'll go ahead and put this like this. Let's put this all on one line so we don't get any weird line ending characters in there. And now we have this string here, and we want to just go ahead and replace the contract address here with the contract address we passed in. And then the API key, which we're going to need, which we'll have to put into an environment variable right after this. So we'll say process.env dot, we're going to call it Etherscan API key. Okay, awesome. That should be all we need to build the URL to hit this endpoint. Now you're going to want to create an environment file here for us to grab this environment key. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and create a new file here. I'm going to call it .env.local.dist. Now, if you're playing along here, you want to take out the .dist and put in just .env.local, but this will show you, and you want this in the root directory of your application, not there. Yes, move that. So what we're going to do here is we're going to just say Etherscan API key equals, and we're not going to put a value in there. What you'll want to do is put a value in there and then take the .dist off, and then it'll work. It'll populate this environment variable for you. Now I did go ahead and I have that configured on my desktop already so that I don't have to show the API key as I record this. So I'm going to move from my desktop.env.local right to here. And boom, now I should have the API key in my project and we should be good to go. Excellent. Awesome. So now we have this endpoint. Now we need to go out there and actually fetch it. So let's use the fetch API, fetch the endpoint. I'm going to say then, and is that what we want to do? Sure, we can do that. That looks right? Awesome. And then we want to res.json, right? And I think it's going to be data.results. We'll catch an error if we have an error, and sure, we'll respond with that error, and then we'll end the request, and that's all we want to do. Excellent. So you can see here how some of that Copilot stuff really helps. It just kind of filled that out for us, and I think that is correct. So let's see if that is okay. Now we're either going to get a, whoop, that's not good, that JSON, data.results. This should return, I believe, a 200 with the JSON data. So all the content, the content type headers and all that type of stuff should be good to go. And now with this done, I don't think we're going to need this. There may be some way to have a default response, but we do want to wait for this promise to respond. So this is a piece I'm a little unsure of. If there's a better way to do this. If there's anything in the chat, go ahead and post it below. That'd be awesome. So, all right, excellent. So now let's see if this returns anything. How do we actually test this bad boy out? So we're going to go ahead and go back to our index.js, and within our submit contract address, we're going to basically use the fetch API again, and we're going to fetch the endpoint where it is /API.getABI, and it will be a post. Get out of here. It will be a post, and make the headers JSON. Yeah. Body JSON.stringify contract address. That's exactly what we want to do. Then the response, we'll just log out the data. We'll catch any errors. Okay. That looks good. So all we're doing here is we're using the fetch API when we hit the submit button, and we're calling the /API/getABI, which houses another request on the backend. So this is running on the server out to Etherscan to grab the ABI of the contract that we're passing in. And what we're expecting is a console.log of the actual ABI. So let's see if this actually works. All right, so it's still rendering. That's a good sign. But we need a contract. So let's go ahead and let's go to OpenSea, and let's go ahead. Let's grab the Moonbirds contract address. And contract is here. Let's grab that bad boy, and let's plug this in and hit next. Boom, baby. look at that. We have our ABI. Now this ABI looks a little strange. But we do have, okay, so we have a key here, type event. So let's see if we, let's parse this. Let's go ahead and parse this. So let's say const ABI equals JSON.parse the data.ABI. Was there an ABI key in there? Let's see. And then we're going to go ahead and console.log the ABI. Okay. All right, so I don't think there's an ABI key. I think it's just the data. There we go. All right, so now we can look at this a little bit better. All right, so look at this. So we have basically an array of objects that contain a couple of different keys. Type is probably the one we want to filter by, right? So we're gonna, yeah, we have all these events, and we have functions, we have events, and we have errors. Awesome. So what we want to do now is just basically filter this by the event type. So we're going to say filter the ABI for event types, right? And let's see if our AI, boom, baby. Now we'll console.log those events. We don't need this line anymore. Let's get this out of here. And let's see if this works. Contract address, submit. Boom. Now we have all of the events that this contract fires in a nice little array. Sick. All right, so we're on about 22 minutes. I wanted to try to get this done as fast as possible. I don't want to make these videos hours in length. I want to chop them up in ways that I think make sense. So I think this is kind of a pause point for the for where we're at. So what we did was we developed this first page to be able to collect a contract address. And we then developed a small portion of the ABI API, which allows us to go out to Etherscans API and grab the ABI of the contract that we entered. So many acronyms here. But what we have is now the capability for us to input a contract address and basically get a list of events that contract fires. Now, if we put goobly gosh data in here, let's see what happens. Okay, so we actually get an invalid address back from Etherscan, so we can probably catch that in some way, and send that back to the user in a way that makes sense. But we do need to do some type of validation on the contract address, but we can easily throw that in there. So what I'd like to do is probably in the next episode here, I may create the project on GitHub and commit it to GitHub, and just get it up there in its current state, and yeah, and then we're going to move on to listing out these events in the user interface and allowing you to click the events that you want to listen to. So that should be the next one. All right, any questions, comments, improvements, anything we could do differently here, please let me know. I hope this recorded successfully, and we'll see you in the next one. Thanks.